Oh, a great start to this Monday morning, the 11th day of April. Good morning, everybody. This is the Morning Drill on Stream Television and the Allegheny News Talk Sports Network. Joining us this morning is local author Nancy Williams. Good morning, Nancy. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you this morning. Let's learn a little bit about yourself before we talk about the new book.
Sure, you bet.
All right. Where'd you grow up?
I'm a resident of Meadville, Pennsylvania. Lived there most of my life. Went to Allegheny College and spent about 5 years out in Colorado, and then came back, and I've been here ever since.
What did you enjoy doing as a kid?
Oh, it was very outdoorsy. I grew up on a farm. My parents had kind of a little subsistence farm. We had cows and horses and stuff like that. Yeah, so it was a really great environment to grow up in.
Yeah, a lot of hard work as a kid then.
Yes.
Any hobbies? Or was it pretty much just working on the farm?
Again, we did a lot of fishing and just did a lot of good stuff like that. I've, been a writer for most of my life. I started out even in high school. Penned my first short story when I was about 17 years old. So that was a main thing for me, yeah.
What did you enjoy reading while you were growing up?
A lot of Stephen King, probably at too early of an age. Yeah, a lot of his books, and really kind of cut my teeth on him. My sister was a big reader of his, and so she would pass those down to me, and like I said, probably... Wow. Given the nature of this stuff, probably a little bit too early for me to be reading stuff like that. But
favorite Stephen King novel?
Oh, I'm actually revisiting Salem's Lot right now.
Are you?
Because the next book that I'm going to write is probably a little more towards the thriller or horror bent. So I'm looking at his technique and stuff like that.
Well, as you were approaching graduation time at high school, what were you looking to do in your life? Was it to be a writer? Or
No, actually it wasn't. I was looking towards maybe, again, something a little more outdoorsy. I was interested in like the Forest Service, and actually after I graduated from college, even though I was an English major, I ended up volunteering for the Forest Service out in Colorado and did that for probably 3 years. I was a firefighter. Wow. Did lots of really great, enriching experiences. Kind of scary in a lot of ways, as you can imagine, but yeah, so I had not really any aspirations to be a professional writer at that time.
So how old were you? Where were you when you thought, I'm going to write something? And I'm going to, not just a little something, but put serious thought into, I want to be a writer. I
can actually remember that exact moment. I was lying on the couch at home in the farm where I grew up, and there was this crummy Western on television. It was kind of a B Western. And I remember thinking
and those
myself,
are good ones.
Yeah, right, always. And I remember thinking, like, boy, I think I can do better than that. And so that's how the first idea for my first novel started to gel. And just over the next couple of years, just literally sat on the couch and wrote it longhand, because I hate to say it, we didn't have computers back in those days, but so just sat on the couch and started writing it out, and then it ended up actually being my senior comp for Allegheny.
Wow. So it took you several years to write that then?
Yeah, I wasn't, was doing it off and on. Again, writing something longhand is long. Tedious and arduous. Yeah, it's long, as you can imagine, and so just did it when I could, and literally the rewrites that I went through, again, longhand, and then finally, probably I think my junior year in college, we started to get a little more advanced and had some computers and stuff like that, and was able to actually tap it out then.
Wow. Yeah. So did you finish that project and then think, wow, I've accomplished that. That was great. I want to do it again.
Yes, definitely. After I wrote it for my senior comp, I did that, and it was a success, pretty nice. But then I just put it away because I just got caught up in, again, moving out to Colorado, and maybe thought I wanted to pursue something a little more outdoor. So put it on a shelf for years, literally like 10 years. Wow. And in the meantime, I started writing another novel, just a little, again, sort of a historical fiction bent. But again, just life was taking a different direction at that point, and just really didn't see myself as doing that professionally, or just didn't really know how to go about it. Again, it was back in the days when the internet was not around, and so doing that was a lot more difficult than it is today.
And here we are with, this is your third book?
This is actually my fourth.
Your fourth book?
Fourth book, yeah.
Wow. All right. Pull it up just a little bit. There you go. There it is. Let's talk about the book. And I'll let you just kind of dive right into it. And then, because I have some other questions I want to ask, but first of all, I want to learn about this particular book, and then we can get into some of those other questions.
Sure. Well, this is the first book that I've written that's a contemporary novel. The other three that I wrote were, again, historical fiction. They were mostly a trilogy. This one is a big departure from what I've written before. It's kind of a suspense thriller, a little techno, if you will. It's centers around infidelity and the ramifications of infidelity. The main character is a guy who's kind of finds himself in a cliche of a marriage, and it's kind of cookie cutter, and he decides that he wants to have an affair to spice things up. He loves his wife, but he doesn't want to get a divorce, but he just wants a way to kind of, as he puts it, let off some steam, and ends up getting involved in this company that facilitates affairs in the name of saving marriages, which, of course, that's really never pans out. Yeah. And he finds himself involved with this company that's really it's a high-tech surveillance company, and it just really kind of goes south from there.
Where do you pull your influence is from? I mean, is it something that over time you just start thinking about certain characters, or do you see something you think, oh, that would make an interesting character? Or, I mean, do you take people from real life and kind of mold them into characters in your book?
First rule of writing is you never say that.
Never say that, right?
They're all fictitious. Nobody, nobody's ever taken from real life.
But you have to be influenced by life.
A little, life, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of this book comes from knowing a lot of people who certainly had affairs and been unfaithful, and people that I don't think are necessarily bad people, but they just find themselves in certain situations, and maybe they, by their friends' estimations, they become bad people because they've done one bad thing. And I think that's what this book is about, that it's not necessarily, people aren't just the sum of their parts. I mean, they can still be, you can still be a good person and do a bad thing, or something that's not necessarily, find themselves in not an ideal situation.
The magic of reading is interpretation. Everybody has a different interpretation of what they've read.
Yes.
So do you have people who read the book and say, hey, maybe call you up and say, was this character about me? Or
I've had a little bit of that. People want to know if a certain person is based on a certain somebody,
whether they see that.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, how much is this character based on, or how much of me is in a lot of the characters? Actually, is a lot of what people want to know. And I think as a writer, you can find yourself a little bit in all of your characters. There's a little bit of you in everybody that you write about.
But isn't it nice, too, that you can write these characters and have them have certain qualities that maybe you don't possess?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, especially with, not so much with this book, but with the trilogy that I wrote, the first 3 books, the main character is a very strong female character. And that's definitely... you can play God a little bit and put yourself in a situation where you always, the main character can, you have some pretty difficult situations, but can handle things in a way that maybe you would really like to see yourself handling, or, be the hero, or, a very strong person, that kind of thing.
So when did you start drafting the initial concept of this book?
This was about 2 years ago that I started doing this, and I did it in a very different way. The books that I've written before, I had them pretty well planned out in my head. But this one, I just decided to take it a very different way and do more of a stream of consciousness thing. So I took my laptop to work every day, and just on lunch hour, just banged out, as many pages as I could. Really didn't plan anything in advance, never did an outline or anything like that. A lot of people do that, but it just really came out, which is kind of a nice thing if you're writing a suspense novel, because if you don't know how it ends, then your reader's not going to know how it ends either.
So how important was it for you to get that ending right?
Oh, with this one, it was because it's a kind of a suspense thriller type thing. I mean, there's a lot of twists and turns in it. That was actually a lot more difficult than I've ever had, more difficult process than I've ever had before, just because I really didn't know how it was going to turn out. Really, right up until the very last scene, I had no idea what was going to happen. So that was a tricky process. In fact, I had to use my husband as a good sounding board, because to really hash it out, and you don't want to have it, as an author, you really want to tie up all your loose ends and things like that. And so it's very good and very helpful to have a sounding board to bounce stuff off of and be like, no, wait a minute, that character couldn't have done that because he wasn't there, or something like that.
Is it easier to end the story or to start the story?
Oh boy, it just kind of depends on the book. I've had both ways happen. Sometimes I can always tell how a story is going to go if the first page comes easily to me. There's been a couple books where I have struggled with the first page and just agonized over it for months, and it just never. But to me, I think if I can nail that first page, then the rest of the book seems to come pretty easily.
I'd have to imagine that it's a pretty rewarding experience to write a book, to go through that entire process. You said some of those, it's been years, but to start it, develop it, end it, send it off, And when you get it in the mail, we talked a little bit about this. When you get that final product in the book, how nervous are you to open it up and to make sure there's no mistakes? This is it. It's going out like this.
Right. Yeah, that is a huge process. I mean, there's the editing process, of course, is a very long process. So by the time I send a book out, I've already looked at it a million times. I'm sick of it already. I don't want to even look at the characters anymore. And then an editor gets a hold of it, and then it's kind of starting that whole process all over again. And so there's a lot of back and forth between an editor and myself. At least this last editor that I worked with, I would say probably half a dozen times anyway. My very first editor, I think we looked at that book 20, 30 times, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, right down to the very last typo and just content and pacing, or is one chapter too long, is this too short? I mean, just the look of the book and that kind of thing. I think the most nerve-wracking thing for me is actually when a graphic artist gets a hold of the cover, and so there's their interpretation of what the book is actually going to look like and what I think the cover should look like. There's definitely some input. You have that, and I have most of the time you have final cut over what the cover is going to look like, but there is a huge, obviously, room for interpretation there. So that's, to me, is the most nerve-wracking part.
When you got this book back, were you happy?
I was, yeah. They asked me, what if I had any ideas of what I wanted it to look like, and for this particular story, there's a business card for the company played a kind of a large part in the in the whole plot of the thing, and so I thought, well, that should be kind of an integral part of the cover. So that bit of advice I got there, and then with this kind of a flamey, steamy look to it, it kind of is, I think, representative of the way of the storyline. So I was pleased with it.
We're here with local author Nancy Williams. 20 minutes past the hour of 8 o'clock. This is the Morning Drill on Stream Television and the Allegheny News Talk Sports Network. When you get the book back and you're having that dialogue with the editor or with the graphic design folks, does it feel like when they make suggestions, does it feel like, oh, they're touching my baby, this is mine? Or do you take that input and say, okay, I can kind of see that? Do you look forward to getting that input from outsiders?
I do, yeah. I mean, there's definitely, it is a little nerve-wracking. I mean, you're hopeful that you didn't, I'm hopeful that I didn't botch it so to the point where it needs like a huge rewrite.
Right.
But usually if you've gotten to a point with where a publisher is going to buy it, those issues are gone. So it's maybe
sometimes creative people,
right.
This is my thing. I don't touch it.
Right. With me, I actually do really welcome the editing process. I mean, I just want to make the best product that I possibly can have. There's been very few times where I've like really dug my heels in and said, no, that's not gonna fly. But it's definitely a give and take, and you just have to have thick skin. If any, that's the main part about being a writer. If you've got to be able to take criticism. If you can't, you're just not going to make it.
What's your favorite aspect about writing? Is it coming up with the ideas? Is it the writing process? Is it getting that final product and actually being able to show it off?
Actually, I think later in the game, once I've got the very first draft settled down, and then I like to just really start to go back over it and tidy it up. Going back to Stephen King, he has a great book that's called On Writing, where it's kind of his perspective on his whole career and that kind of thing. I forget who he was quoting, but it's a great way to look at the rewriting process, where when you first write a story, you're telling yourself the story. The rewrite, then you're finding out what's not the story. And that's I really love that process, just sort of weeding through things and pulling out all the extraneous dialogue and just scenes, because I can definitely tell where I am telling myself the story and just getting it down on paper. That's where I think a lot of writers will do outlines and things like that, and that's just not the way I do it. But just really kind of combing through and just really pulling out what the essence of the story is a really exciting process. It's
funny, in my line of work, sometimes you have to edit out the best footage or that best clip or that whatever. Do you find that when going back to help with pacing or to help to push the story along, you have to remove maybe something that was maybe your favorite part of the conversation or of the book? Yeah, and that is hard. That's where that my baby stuff kind of comes in. You have a really favorite scene or just a little clip of dialogue, and then you just realize that it's just really not serving the story at all, or somebody else says like, this isn't so great, and I have found a few instances where I've really been clinging to those little moments, and then you finally realize that
if you look at it from a couple people's different perspectives, that yeah, okay, this probably does need to go. Or another way I've looked at it, if there's a problematic scene that I've just reworked maybe 3 or 4 times, then you realize that even though it may feel really good in a lot of ways, if it's got to be reworked that much, it's just got to go.
And I'm sure you probably spend a lot of time thinking about those things that you plan on cutting, because you're looking, does this affect the dialogue down the road, or a situation down the road, or something I'm trying to build up to?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's been pages that have hit the cutting floor because of that. It's like, oh, that is not going to work. Or maybe I'll do a little bit of research, later on and find out something that maybe a new angle to the story that wasn't there before. But there's a scene in page 10 that's not going to make any sense anymore, so it's just going to have to go. So
talk about the name of the book and how you, and I'm sure that's going to be a difficult process, right? Coming up with the title of the book.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, actually with this book, that was the catalyst for the whole book itself. I think, again, it was one of those moments where I was at the gym and I was on a treadmill or something, and this phrase just kind of floated into my head. It was the title, right? The phrase, Rabid Philanderer, or like the Rabid Philanderer, and just kept kind of rolling that around. And I just thought, well, that sounds like a pretty cool title for a book. And then that sort of spawned the story. So that's probably for me the easiest part of it. The title doesn't seem to. I mean, the one book that I wrote, the second novel that I wrote, was called, I ended up calling it Grace. And I still kind of struggle with that title a little bit, because it's kind of a ubiquitous word. It's, we see it a lot in book titles, and so it's not very catchy, but I ended up just sticking with it because I thought it best served the storyline.
And I'm sure for you it's difficult because you're working out, you're trying to come up with the title, and you've got Mike Fiorillo next to you, just constantly wanting to talk. Yeah, just talk. And it's like, Mike, I'm in the zone.
Yes,
I'm working.
He's usually behind me, so I can't even see him. It's like the little devil on your shoulder.
That's right. Well, you said you were working on this at work during your lunch hour. I'm sure there were days where that hour just would never end because you were just trying to get some ideas out. But I'm sure there was times when that hour went by and you still wanted to type more. How do you deal with that when the ideas are flowing, but your time is limited to get them down?
You just got to stop and literally put a mental bookmark there. And usually when I'm in a groove like that or in a zone, then I know that I can remember, because it's so strong. If I think that it's maybe a possibility of an idea or something, then I will maybe make a little note or just jot a little thing down so that it'll jog my memory. But you just have to stop and go on with life. The ideal situation is for writing to be your only job, though. I was at a period where I was not working for a while, and I could write for 8 hours a day and cranked out 15-20 pages a day, which is fantastic. So it's very different from 1 or 2 pages a day. But the main thing is to treat it like a job, or just keep it be in the habit of it, so that the characters stay alive and the story stays alive in your head. And so you can remember what you were doing. If you put it down for a week or 2 weeks, then it gets hard to get back into it. Do
you have a notepad beside the bed, so when you wake up in the middle of the night, you jot down the ideas?
Every now and then I do. Yeah. I do jot some things down, but usually they stick. Yeah, I've not had too much trouble with that.
Talk about publishing today. As a local author, are you happy with the way technology has helped authors or writers out by getting their stories published, or is it more difficult because there are more people trying to get that exposure?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword for sure. I've hardly met anybody that doesn't think that they have a book in them or thinks that they can write a book, and it's a lot harder than you think it is. But I know that way back when, in the 70s and even in the 80s, it was literally people would take books to New York City and throw them over the transom, the little window at the top of the door, and it just, you wait for a phone call. There was no email. There was no anything like that. So the amount of people who were actually writing novels was way, way less. And then, of course, we have these technological advances, which are great, but then it's just more and more publicized about the huge success that a very small percentage of authors do have, and like the J.K. Rowlings and all those guys. And so it just, now I think the market really is glutted, and with a lot of, I'm certainly one of them in a way. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who go with small presses, or just the self-publishing industry is huge now, and so I think it's a double-edged sword.
What's next for you?
Well, after this one, I've actually started another novel. It's going to be more of a suspense thriller, sort of based on, there's an urban legend around Meadville about the pig people of Round Top. I don't know if you're familiar with that yet, but I think I'm going to incorporate that into my next book.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So again, you're pulling from those experiences.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Maybe.
So are you excited about, do you get excited, or is it kind of like, okay, I know I'd like to do a new book, but I got to build myself up to that point?
Once you break the seal, get the first couple pages, like again with that, if that first page goes really well, which fortunately with this one, it just popped out. The first couple pages were very nice, very easy to do. But yeah, once I get into it, then it just starts to roll. But again, it's that habit. If I let it go for a week or two, then it just starts to. That's when it feels like work, when I'm actually not doing it. So.
Now, do you try to finish one before you start the next, or are you having notes for the other book while you're finishing one? I
try and do one at a time. I think the most enviable position for me is to actually be publicizing one novel, writing the first draft, or working with an editor on another one, and then actually doing a first draft of another one. So, but that's still not, just like doing the first draft of 2 or 3 things at a time. I think that would be a dangerous thing to do.
All right, Nancy, tell us where folks can find the book.
You can actually find this at the publisher's website, sunburypress.com. You can get it directly from them. You can also get it from Amazon.com or from me if you would like a signed copy. I have a website, www.nlwbooks.com.
Very
and I can get you one in the mail.
Excellent. Nancy, it was a real pleasure meeting you this morning.
Real pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much for having me.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'll tell you what, I have a lot of respect for folks like yourself who can sit there and master that writing and accomplish it and send it off, get it published, and there it is. It's a beautiful looking book.
Thank you.
So wishing you all the best. And despite Mike Fiorillo being a mutual friend, you have a lot of talent, because I know sometimes he surrounds himself with some shady people, but you're not one of them.
Thank you.
All right, Nancy, good luck with everything, and please come back and keep us updated on the book and your next project.
I would love that. Thank you very much.
All righty, final look at news coming up next.
You can know